So she died. It was sudden and quite a surprise, but not nearly as surprising as what followed. It started with a glint of light, like a shy curtain opening to noon. And then she was there, this woman, somehow attached to her by gold strands, which apparently had been in place for all of her life, though she had never seen them, never noticed them. She found that she didn't need to speak. Her thoughts were adequate. Who are you? Your companion, your guardian. My ancestor? Perhaps. I will be taking you to the mother now, that we have a few stops first. The mother. Yes. She had been born of a woman, and she would return to a woman now. Did this translucent body which held her consciousness have cells? Whatever comprised it was full of warmth and gratitude and love. There was no fear. First came the memories. Was this what people referred to when they said, "My life flashed before my eyes"? Those moments of grief and of glory? They were somehow equal, and yet part of a crescendo luring her, stretching her beyond perceived limitations. There were the bullies of 4th grade. Yes, that was a life theme. The fear of rejection, abandonment, the fear that she would never be good enough, that there would always be someone to write a 2-page list of her failings in case she had neglected to notice them. But seeing these girls in her memory was oddly redemptive, because she knew how their lives had ended. Jackie, the elfin child who had befriended her when nobody else would, had spent her last cancer-filled weeks embroidering temple clothes for her children. Terry, the most insistent bully, had given one of her kidneys to her dying brother. Stephanie had devoted years to mentoring young women. Each of them had ended up being heroic in some way, so seeing them in this simple setting brought no pain, just made her smile. There were the bullies of middle school, the boys especially, who, in their own insecurities, persuaded her that she was ugly. David, in particular, had given her a valentine which said, "You are the ugliest thing I have ever seen." But she saw all of them now with a knowledge of what they had suffered and what they had become in their own lives. David's mother had died in a car accident the year after he created that awful valentine. How deep had his pain gone? At least 2 of the boys who had made fun of her chubby body had gone on to be doctors and chemists. She had seen one of them when her son had an ear infection, and he had said, "Well, you're as beautiful as always. What seems to be the problem with your boy?" And there was her mother. "You have just ruined Christmas for everyone. I never weighed more than 122 pounds when I was your age. Daddy and I were noticing you with your friends, and you were the fattest. After all the weight you've gained, did people recognize you?" But at the thought of her mother, she became aware of who were these glorious beings who had suddenly appeared, also attached to her by those thin gold strands. They were connected to her mother as well, who was suddenly present. And she was connected to her mother. In fact, the thread was triple wound around her wrist, maybe 1 extra circle for every time she had tried to pull away. We send all of our failings and all of our joys down through the generations. That should not surprise you. You did it too, didn't you? Said one of these beings with more amusement than condemnation. It was a face she knew, though she had seen it only in photographs. It was her great-great-grandmother, a woman who had been institutionalized for 40 years. Postpartum depression leading to schizophrenia. Did that gold strand hold her schizophrenia as well as her triumphant love for her husband? Another voice or a thought. For generations, we thought that unreachable standards could shrink us. We counted ourselves failures whenever we battled our ideals, whenever we compared ourselves to impossible imaginings. She recognized this woman, she who had never had any body fat and who, she realized later, had used sacred fasting to keep herself thin. It was a form of anorexia. But now she, her great-grandmother, was full-bodied and smiling, a fan of light emanating from her, her smile itself an iteration of love. "From the time of Eve," said another voice, "we feared what our children might do." I feared too. This was her mother. All she could feel was love. "You never meant to hurt me," was the consuming thought in every particle of her spirit body. "Never. I always loved you." "I always loved you." The thought was so powerful that she worried it might rattle whatever could be rattled in this expanding space. "For the next part, you must be naked," said the woman. Somehow this made sense, though the women around her were clothed in bright robes. "You have worn and been worn too much," said the one who had spent most of her mortal life institutionalized. "Worn out," said another. It began, the unraveling. First came the black chains she hadn't realized were wrapped around the rest of her clothes. She looked at them. They appeared heavy like lead, but one of the angels snapped them off with a joint of her pinky. Then there was a fur coat. What was this? She had never owned a coat like this. "You used it for protection," said a distant voice, also female. "You were so afraid that you would be hated if anyone saw who you were." Was this fur coat the post-mortal version of body fat? She felt it melt around her. There were more clothes under the fur, but they simply came undone, fell apart like ancient lace. But then, oh pain for the first time, she was truly naked and raw. She wasn't ashamed, just raw. Do I present myself to God like this? Oh no. You have rituals to perform. That's how your clothes will be spun. Sit here." A chair, cushioned with, were they clouds? Appeared behind her. She sat. At her feet was a basin of water, and at her side a horn-like container of oil. She could feel oil on her head, her neck, her breasts. Her feet were immersed in the water, and some of her hairs were painlessly plucked. She could hear blessings pronounced upon her, and knew that they were ancient. There were no words that she could hear, but every part of her felt renewed and comforted. "Now it's time," said the guardian. She turned and saw that other woman, the woman she had blamed for much of the pain of her later life, the one who had lied about her, betrayed her, ruined her name, attacked her family, attempted to destroy her. Whatever this unfleshed body was, it could tense, clench. "I can't go to her," she said. "Then you can't go to God," said the guardian. It was a firm but gentle statement, spoken. She inhaled and realized that she was surrounded by her favorite scent, honeysuckle. Did every newly dead get their favorite scent in this place? Not only did the fragrance fill her nostrils, it dimmed her bitterness. She thought her question into the scent. "What must I do?" "You must step forward. Step towards her." She saw that this other woman, the woman she had called Cancer, was also resistant, also bitter. Cancer was the name she had given her, though she was not a disease. She was simply destructive, sowing hatred everywhere, weaving herself and her relentless tendrils through lives and families like nefarious ivy. Was it possible that Cancer believed her own lies? "She is damaged," said the guardian, "and you cannot go further until you minister to her." Suddenly, there were other women around Cancer, Cancer's own ancestors. She could hear or sense their words. It was a call and response. "We loved you enough to let you live, but we could not protect you from your choices. We championed your future, but we could not protect you from your choices. We prayed you into your talents, but we could not protect you from your choices." And then Cancer spoke. "Why did you leave me? Why did you leave me? Why did you leave me?" Cancer's pain was unfathomable and irresistible. She approached Cancer. She knew what had to come next. There was already a basin of water and some lavender-scented oil on the ground. She reached out to touch the head of that person who had hurt her and said, "May I?" Cancer bowed her head. She dipped her finger into the oil and patted Cancer's forehead, and then dipped her hands into the water. "I wash your head and pronounce a blessing of redemption on your thoughts." Suddenly other voices joined hers, the ancestors. "I bless you to move beyond the wounds and let them heal. They were not yours. They came generations ago when one tribe betrayed another and one people enslaved another. You may move forward. I bless you to remember the ways you were loved and the ways you loved. I bless your memories of love to outshine and overwhelm your other memories. I bless your intellect to see the truth and cherish it." So many angels. "Go on," said the angel who had last spoken. "I anoint your ears." The angels joined in. "Listen to the music of grief, and let it improve the music of joy. Listen to the trees all the way from Africa, for they have always breathed life into your soul. Listen to the hateful waves, and let them become beautiful, for they accompanied an ancestral journey which you must honor now, despite its pain. Listen to the shouting, even the gunshots from your childhood memories, and let them diminish so that you may hear the holy choirs at all times and in all places." They waited. She dipped her finger again into the oil. "I bless your neck, that it may hold up your head in dignity and joy. No more shame. And that it may let your head bow in the presence of the sacred," she said, dipping her finger again into the oil. "I bless your breast and your heart, that you may love fully." "Now," said the angel, but she didn't need to be told. Her next task was to wash her enemy's feet. She knelt and took first the right foot and then the left and placed them in the water. She rubbed the lavender oil into her hands. "I bless your feet. I bless your feet. I bless your feet," she said. "For every journey of your ancestors, for every journey of your life, into sorrow, into joy, into loss, into fear, into restoration, for every journey of your posterity, for it is all one journey." She hated to admit it, but at first she had wanted an apology. She had wanted to tell the angels, "Do you know what she did to me, what she did to my family?" But what she saw now was far better than vindication. This woman, the one she had called Cancer, was changing, glowing. Even her hair, which had grown gray throughout the ritual, was now almost entirely white and long, strangely long. "Pull it," said a voice. She realized that this was not an evil thing she was instructed to do, not a punishment. These hairs would become her clothes. Each hair contained the most painful parts of Cancer's life and that of her ancestors. And pulling them out was redemptive. "Will it hurt her?" "No," came the response all around her. She pulled out a hair, much longer than it appeared, for it came from deep roots and stretched as she pulled. As it stretched, it transformed into a strand of warm light. The woman beside her said, or indicated, "It goes here." At first she thought that the woman was pointing to a harp. It wasn't a harp. It was a loom. Had all visionaries confused looms with harps? She wove the strand of light into the loom strings and pulled out another hair. It was clear that the removal of each hair was a relief to Cancer. After 10 strands, she could see the beginnings of the cloth. It was magnificent, light in every conceivable color. She pulled out another hair, and Cancer exhaled a sigh. The process of pulling and weaving was timeless, for time was not measured. As the hairs were pulled, new ones grew on Cancer's head, baby fine, dark, but somehow full of light. Finally, the swath of light on the loom was ready, and those around her bade her to stand and be robed. They took the fabric. It had a design, but she could not identify it as anything familiar yet, and clothed her expertly and quickly. One swath around her body, and another draped over her right shoulder. "Beautiful," said the woman. "Do you know how beautiful you are?" "Yes." "Do you understand what you need to do now?" "I need to give her a new name. She is not the name I gave her before. That name does not fit here." Even as she thought of possible names, one came to her as the right one. Lucille. Light. Lucille. In the distance, a note played, or was it a choir? The name brought a musical response which, translated from the nonverbal language, was forever. "Now stand," said the guardian. "It is time." She glanced back and saw Lucille turning away, approaching another woman who was seated before a basin and a horn of oil. "Walk." Flanked by the women who had been with her for all of her life, and by those who had been with her many mothers through the generations, she walked. Trumpets sounded, but not like an interruption. An announcement. The angels around her began singing. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. In this space of light, yet another curtain opened just a bit, revealing brilliance she could never have borne without the cleansing she had just experienced. The words of the song changed. Holy, holy, holy. With every repetition, she realized that her own body and her robes were growing brighter. The curtain opened wider, the light expanding in all directions, its reflections prismed in unseen crystals. She saw that her new robes were as bright as the glory before her. "Mother," she said, or thought, "The mother?" She sensed the yearning arms open for her. Holy, holy, holy. She walked into them, coming home